Hello, and today we'll be installing Carl's Aluminum X-Ends. Here I have his new Aluminum X-Ends, all three parts that I'll be using. And these are what's going to be installed today in place of the plastic X-Ends. Now, since I just installed his aluminum carriage, I already have some of the work for the disassembly already completed here. Let me go over what I've done so far. We've basically removed the active cooling fan as well as the two bolts from the bottom of the carriage into the cooling block, and removed the whole entire extruder assembly and carefully set it behind. There it is. So we've taken that off. Done. Now, in addition to this, I've already loosened up my stepper motor. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out here right now. I'm going to pull Al's aluminum bearing idler out as well and set those aside. I also have the bolts and the 3 wire ties that came with Carl's setup, so we'll put those with Carl's aluminum X-Ends as well. Let's go ahead and remove the carriage. That's enough. And once we have the carriage out, we're also going to remove the belt from the carriage itself. Take that belt and slide that out. Tighten it down for right now so it doesn't work its way loose. I don't want to lose anything. Set that aside as well. Set the belt aside with your stock parts that you pulled off so far. And now he says we're going to carefully remove the wiring harness from your Y stepper, your Y switch, like so. Now I've already gone ahead and removed the panels from the printer. So that's already been taken care of. But over here, you'll usually see, in most cases, you'll see a cotter pin right here that hides your cables. I have a little thingiverse support I printed out that kind of snaps in place. So my cables are going to come out with that. You may have a cotter pin. Just remove the cotter pin and then carefully remove the wires from the assembly. I'm not going to bother straightening them because I know they're fragile and they're probably going to go back in bent about the same direction they currently are. Now we need to unrun the wires underneath here. There's a wire tie right about here. So we need to carefully snip that wire tie while not causing any damage to the wires itself. I think I got it. To get that out of the way so we can start working on dropping the gantry. Now we need to remove this plastic harness over here. It's actually being held in with two small nuts. 2 very, very small nuts. So find a wrench that will fit up in there. And remove those 2 small nuts. And in doing so, that plastic piece that routes the wiring will come right out. Also, when you're doing that, this little piece, which is where your wire tie was tied to, that was holding your wire up into this plastic routing, will also come out as well. This goes facing, screws in there like so, to the front of the printer. So we'll set this all aside as well. Okay, now that we got all the small things out of the way, the next thing we're going to carefully do is actually work our bars loose here. They're clipped into the plastic corners on each corner, all four. You got two in the back, two in the front. And we want to carefully pull those bars down with not too much pressure. We don't want to damage the bars, and we don't want to break the plastic either. In this case, this one is fairly close to the Y switch, so I'm going to unplug the Y switch so it doesn't catch it on the way down. I don't want to rip that wire in. And I'm going to tuck that wire out of the way. And I'm going to work on removing these. Now while you do this, you need to remove these bars while supporting it the other sides at the same time, so you can bring the back down and the front down. So this is going to take a little time, so I'm going to do this off camera and then we'll be right back. Now I've decided to lay it on its back to remove the gantry, since I'm here by myself and it's easier to support it instead of it falling by gravity down to the bottom of the printer. This way, upon removing the gantry in here like this, I unclipped the two tops and then worked it forward a little bit, pulling the bar out of the back. And then you carefully remove the gantry out of the machine, and we can simply remove the stock X-ends here. One thing to note real quick in removing the gantry, not only was the Y switch wire possibly in its way, so I disconnected that, but I also quickly noted that the LED cable, if you have a Replicator 2, runs right across the front right top corner of the gantry. So I had to hold this out of the way up while I removed the bar from the gantry, making sure I didn't damage that wire in the process. So let's go ahead, I'll go ahead and remove the stock X-ends here and get everything set up and remove the frame off the table and prepare to assemble Carl's Aluminum X-Ends on the gantry. So we're back. I'm going to assume that we're going to need this switch here. Let's start by removing these rods so I can take a closer look at that switch. There we go. It literally just has some sort of plastic holder that it clips into. So it's going to take a little pressure to pull that out. I'll put the screw back in the switch so I know what screw that is. And then we're going to take a little pressure here and work these X-ends off the rods. Of course, if they're properly greased, you're going to slide a little bit while you're trying to get these off. So I'm going to do a little on the top, a little on the bottom, a little on the top, a little on the bottom. Keep working it until we get our stock X-ends. Put that with the other stock parts we don't need, like that aluminum carriage. We will be needing these bushings. leave those on. And let's see if we can get enough grip to work this loose. Now I do notice we have little holes here in the back. So I'm going to go the way of a brass pin. I do brass so it doesn't damage the bar at all. I'm going to work on tapping this out. Okay, it seems tapping it out was the best way to remove that. I just had to do it in one. I need to do it with a steel punch because it was in there a lot tighter than I thought it was. And besides using a steel punch, I had to use one of my rubber vices to hold the plastic piece still while I tapped on one side and also make sure the rod didn't come out all the way so I could work it out the last quarter of an inch or so. So we got both of our stock X-ends off and removed. And let's get all of the parts we need. 3 wire ties, aluminum carriage, put the bushings with carriage, 1 aluminum X-end, bolts and nuts, and the other aluminum X-end as well. Looking at the machine, it's going to go on this side, this will go on that side, this will go in the middle of course. And we'll move on with the assembly here. Okay, so we're back, and it seems like most of everything he has here takes a 2mm hex. And of course your 5.5mm wrench is also going to be needed. If you don't own one, I do suggest buying one because you will need a small 5.5mm wrench eventually if you ever have to replace one of the thermocouplers on your Makerbot. So FYI for the future. There's a few different parts I did grab. I grabbed a belt tensioner that I've been meaning to install. I figured it's the perfect opportunity. Plus I need to grab the steel rod that goes with the aluminum X-ends from Al's aluminum bearing idler. So first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to assemble the stepper motor. So plug facing down. That's how you want that assembled. And that will take 4 of his 1.5mm bolts. And these are the bolts without. He has 2 types of bolts here. He has bolts that actually look like they have a built-in washer, and then 4 bolts without. The stepper motor is going to take the 4 bolts without. We're not going to tighten this all the way down. We're just going to fit the screws in there. We're going to need to slide the stepper motor around later when we tighten the tension of the belt. That's why we're going to leave this loose. Alright, so we're back, and we got our stepper motor with the bracket on the front loose. Perfect way to go. So we're going to take the two solid bearings without grooves in it. We're going to put it on the bar closest to you. Take the two bushings with the grooves in it. We're going to put it on the bar farthest away from you. Now if you have your X-ends standing up like this, which is how they're going to go, the way you can tell they're facing the right direction is underneath. You see these brackets that actually hold your belt. These brackets need to be on the outside. So this will be the furthest right, and that would be the furthest on your left. So you know we have them facing the right way. So now that we know which bracket goes where, we're going to put the bars in. I'm going to do this in such a way to make sure it's really nice and level. I'm going to use the table. Since the X-end is slightly unlevel, there's a little divot in there. You can actually square it up with the table quite well. Pick up on the bar and make sure it's perfectly flat against the table. Make sure you have your 1.5mm bit on your driver before you do so. There we go. So we know that one's really flush. And those brackets are furthest out. And same thing with this one. Now this one I'm going to choose not to use the table, just because we want to make sure they're squared up when we're making these flush. So instead, I'll use another flat object. Let's use the cradle or the carriage. You can push that up against there flush like so. There you go. Now we have these flush on both sides. We have the brackets on the outer side, which is what we're looking for. Now that we know the brackets are on the outer side, with the stepper motor, with the pinion facing you, the power facing away from you, we're going to mount that on the X-end on your right side. And we're going to use all 4 screws that look like they have a washer built onto the screw. We have all 4 screws in our stepper motor bracket connected to the X-end here. Let's go ahead and run the belt loosely around that. Let's slide it down to this end. Because now we're going to install the idler on this side. So we're going to run the pin through the top hole, followed by a washer. Followed by our idler. See if I have enough room to tuck this belt into there. Looks like I do. Push that the rest of the way through. Place the last washer on there. The idler is going to go with the thick part away from you, by the way. And push the pin the rest of the way. Now at this point you should have a loose belt because your stepper motor on your right hand side was never tightened down. It's going to be used as your tensioner when we do go to tension the belt. It won't take much. We should have perfectly flushed rods on each end. We should have our idler in place. As well as if I take my fingers on these X-ends and try to rock it on the table, they're not going to rock, they're going to be squared off with each other. So now we're going to break out a little bit of the blue Loctite. Because in my case, we're going to install our aluminum carriage. Of course, we know which way this goes just based on where the belt is and where the belt tensioner is. And I just got blue Loctite all over the back of my hand. So before I do this, actually, I forgot to loosen the belt tensioner. Let's go ahead and do that. That way I can slip that belt on nice and easily. There we go. Now the reason we're running the Loctite so I can Loctite these in place here one at a time. Just going to roll a little bit on there. Okay, so now I got my carriage in place, running smooth across the whole thing. I'm going to actually tighten down my belt clamp here. And I'm going to check the ride of the belt as I move the carriage back and forth. Make sure it stays parallel and aligned. And it is. Looks good. So now we're going to take our stepper motor. I'm going to pull back on the stepper motor. This will apply tension to the belt. Let's see here. There we go. And we're going to tighten down these screws to hold that tension in place. Check our tension. Feels good. And we're still running parallel. So I got the belt all over towards the middle. And let's adjust this belt so it aligns with it. There we go. Now the belt's off the pull. Nothing's hitting there. Both right in the middle. Looks good. So at this point, we'll flip it over. And we want to loosen these belt clamps here. Make sure we have play so we can actually get the belt underneath there. Again, both these bolts should be facing on the outside here. So hopefully you have these both facing on the outside. If you don't, you may have put the X-end on backwards. So it's in this one. Not enough to get a belt in there. This should be enough. There we go. Check this again, make sure we got enough room to get a belt in there. This could use one more turn. That should work. Now we're going to put our switch back on. Apparently we're not going to need the bolt it came with, so let's pull that out. And for the switch, pull this bolt out. Get the spacer in place. Your bolt's going to go in between the switch and the plug. That's the one we're going to be screwing down to hold it in place. Now I'm going to bring the frame of the printer back up because it's time to put everything back into the printer. We can take our rods and ride it through our bearings here. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to grab the PTFE grease. I'm going to put a little dab of grease in each bearing and then run the rods back and forth in the bearings to make sure the bearings are nice and greased with the PTFE grease. And then I'll take the whole thing and we'll go ahead and put it back into the frame of the printer. Okay, so we got her all greased up and ready to go. And we're going to hold the rods because they like to slide and put it in on an angle like this. And get my headset out of the way. There you go. I'm just going to set it down for a second. We're going to do the right rear first and then the right front. The right front is where the LED cable is, and we'll have to hold that out of the way. Put that rod in there cleanly. Move these cables out of the way. Slip this up. To the right rear. Use that cable. Put it underneath the LED cable. There it goes. And snap the right front. There you go. Then we're going to bring this up and do the left rear. cables are out of the way, and the left front. There we go. Real smooth, real nice feeling, good action. That feels good too. Time to put things back together. So I unplugged the Y switch to get that out of the way as a caution. It wasn't in the instructions, just something I decided to do. We've already checked for smooth action here, but I want to actually make sure those cables are out of the way. I'm going to ride the right side of the printer up, make sure it touches the block up front, and make sure the gantry is good, and I got the other side touching the block as well. No space there. Looks really good. Okay, so we got smooth action, we got good gantry alignment. Okay, so now we're going to move everything pushed up to the front here. And while we're holding it up against the front blocks, we're going to tighten the rear belt latches. I've already done the one farthest away from me. So I'm going to keep my thumb over here, keep this pushed up front. If you loosened it up enough, you should just be able to swing that bracket right over. And while keeping pressure on that with a 5.5mm wrench. We're going to tighten that down. No play, both up front. Great. Now we're going to do the same thing to the rear. We're going to slide it back to the rear, all the way against the switch, and we're going to tighten the fronts. I'll get that done and we'll be back in a second. Now after you got them tightened, we want to again push it up to the front block. Make sure we got an even ride while holding this over here. Check the other side, make sure it's also hitting the front block. There's no play there. Basically, we're just checking our gantry. Looks good. Just do that side. No play at all. Perfect. That's the way the gantry should look. Okay, now we're going to put our wiring harness back in place. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I got that little clip that took that wire tie. That was held up there like this. So we're going to take a wire tie and put it through that clip in the direction that it's screwed in. And we're just going to loosely, very, very loosely, until like the first 2 clicks on the wire tie, click that in place. So that's ready to be put up there right about the time you're going to put the bolt on the screw to hold that wire channel in place. Move this guy out of the way. And we'll start with the front one. So we'll put them both in line there. There you go. Hold that up. Take that bracket with the wire tie. Feed that all the way up to the front of the cables. Put that over the screw as well. Try to grab that with your other hand, your other finger there, and hold it in place. While you start that bolt, Alright, got that all tightened down. Now I can put the bolt onto the back. And we'll run the wires the way they should be ran. And afterwards we're going to install our extruder. Now don't forget we had that loose wire tie up here, so we have to actually pull that tight, because if we don't it's going to catch the belt. You don't want to tighten it all the way, but you do want it down to about maybe a ½ inch diameter minimum, just to hold the wires up there. You don't want to pinch the wires though, but you do want it to hold it up to the top. Once you get that secure but loose distance you want, you definitely want to snip that off. Make sure it's out of the way of the belt, and it is. Have some play here. There you go. Move this up front. You want your ribbons on top of each other so they flex correctly as we kind of run it to the back. Bring it around over top of the stepper motor. Plug your switch port in. Plug your stepper motor in. And take that last wire tie and tie it to the side. With the motor here, I'm actually going to run through one of the empty holes. Looks like the wire tie will fit through the hole. Let's see. And it will. It's a little tight, but it fits. It'll work. That'll hold it in place, and we'll check the ride, see how it looks. And I actually just caught on that switch up here. Let me make sure the switch is a little higher. Not the switch, there's a cable connector that they plug in together. Plug. It seems that it actually grabbed it when it was riding. There we go, it's out of the way now. Looks good. Okay. Time to put everything else back together and then take it for a test print. I'm sure if you've gotten this far along with me in the video, you probably know how to put your active cooling fan on and everything here. At least I hope so. If not, I'm surprised you got this far through the video. Just kidding. This didn't come with any separate bolts for this from his kit, so we're using the stock bolts that we pulled out originally. Looks like I lost my harness. Came untucked there, doing all the work. But, you know, he sent us extra wire ties, so we're good. Let's get our active cooling hood here. Make sure it runs through that little notch. Wires don't get pinched. And we're pretty much done. Go ahead and tighten down these screws on your active cooling fan as soon as I find the Phillips head screwdriver that rolled away on me. There it is. And at that point, you can put your side panels back on. Go through the loading process, load your filament, put your panels back on, level your bed, run your test print, put your window and door back on if you have an enclosure kit, and you're good to go. You've now installed the aluminum carriage with the aluminum X-Ends from Carl with the linear bearings. Much nicer design. Really good looking. I think I'm going to enjoy it. I hear it makes a big difference in the printing too, so let's find out. I do know I'm not going to miss the plastic piece that was holding the stepper motor, because it's come off a few times for maintenance, and as you can see, it started to split here. And I think part of the reason it's a split and some of the warpingness that occurred here was also because I added a heat bed plate to it. So run the temperatures at about 130 inside the cabin of the printer. Some of these parts just don't do good. They weren't printed as high temp ABS. Maybe they are in the 2X, but not the Replicator 2. So make sure you get your switch while your switches are plugged back in. Again, the switches actually make contact, and I'd say you're good to go. Congratulations on your installation of Carl's Aluminum X-Ends and Aluminum Carriage if you purchased one at the same time, and enjoy printing. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful. I know it was helpful for me to actually talk about it while I was going through it, so I figured somebody else can get something out of it at the same time. And if you have any comments, go ahead and leave them below. If you have something bad to say, yeah, go ahead and leave a comment too. I don't care. I'm just not going to look at it anyway. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, if I can even think of any more upgrades to possibly do to this printer at this time, when and if I do, I will make some more videos. So go ahead and subscribe so you'll be ready to actually see the next one. Thanks for watching.